Hello and welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. I'm Melanie Bennett. I haven't been here in a while, and this is my co-host, Shannon Gorsuch. I think I didn't have my mic. I've been away for a bit, and you've been doing this all on your own. How's that going? I haven't seen you in a while.
Well, I yes, it's been going well, and it's a learning experience. You and I have been dividing up tasks on this project for the last couple of months, and so I got to learn how the tasks on the other side of the production of the weekly report that we're doing. And we had James Pugh on last week. James is the publisher of Woke Watch Canada, a newsletter on Substack, and he shared some terrific insights of his own at the end of the video. Definitely worth watching. And the week before, I did a mishmash. That was the date of the October 21st parents' protests across the country and around the world. So lots of developments in the gender world, and
Yeah,
we're back
I've
today.
been away. I've been away in the UK, filling myself with ale and not paying attention to the world, and it was kind of nice. So I'm
How
gonna.
could you? How could you not? We heard there was like giant marches in London and all kinds of stuff going on over there. And
Yeah, but so I
but you were
actually
in Norwood.
spent a week. I spent a week not in Norwich, in Norwich. You'll offend a lot of Norwich
Norwich.
residents. A
Yeah.
fine city. Yeah, I was in Norwich. It's about depending on traffic, 2-3 hours northeast of Britain. If you look at the map of Britain, it's kind of got a bum. It's the ass end of the UK, as we say. Nicely, I guess. So yeah, it was okay. I hadn't been there in quite a while, and it's I guess it's Britain. It doesn't really change aesthetically. It still looked like the same place, but yeah, there was a different vibe. I definitely felt Norwich is a place where you would imagine that wokeness would easily infect. And yeah, I definitely felt that. I heard that in conversations as we were walking along the town. It's got a funny mix of kind of aristocratic history. There's royal estates there, the Sandringham, which is a fairly famous. You can actually go visit Sandringham when they're not there, I guess. And yeah, it has a lot of stately homes, but it's also very agricultural. And so you have like good old boy, like farmer, like salt of the earth type. So it's an interesting place, but it certainly has a lot of that sort of upper middle class, champagne socialist types. I think I used to be a little bit like that when I go back. So yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, certainly, like I said, had a lot of ale. Can't get proper ale in Canada. But anyway, we're not here to talk about me in Norwich. There's a couple of things that have been going on that I would love to talk to you about. I think just to give some context of what we're going to do today, or talk about today, I think if we start off, Amy Hamm is currently, I don't even know if it's a court case, but there's certainly court vibes in the case that she is defending right now. So we're going to talk about that in some detail in a bit. But first, and we're also going to talk about some breaking news from the United Conservative Party of Alberta defending parents' rights. I want to talk about that. And a bit of what's going on. A new report, I think, is from the Fraser Institute. We'll talk about that. But first, I would like to discuss a conversation that you had with Jess from Durham District Concerned Parents. You had a conversation with her today. Do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. Well, Jess of the DDSB Concerned Parents put together an organization back in May. So this is relatively new, but we're seeing this kind of all across the country as parents groups are coming together around this issue of parents' rights, around the kind of the pushing of boundaries in the schools that a lot of people are suddenly waking up to, not just with the gender issue, but with race politics and with wokeness in general and what have you. And so they had a really big groundswell over the summer and a big turnout in September for the September 20th marches. Um, and so they've got a lot of good stuff happening. But right before um, kind of all this built up, they had gone to school board meetings and basically been kicked out and shut down, like a lot of places across the country. We saw that in Windsor, where Windsor parents, like the school board, just locked the doors and let anybody into their board meetings. That has since evolved, and they're now accepting people back in. But this thing we've seen over the last year, 2 years in Canada, where school boards just are silencing parents, they're calling people names, all of that stuff. And Jess and her organization had a big breakthrough week this week, and so our discussion. I was asking her questions to learn more about that. I mean, she was over the moon when I talked to her earlier this week, because it really felt like, okay, like they got heard, and in my discussion with her, I talked about sometimes we get into arguments with people that we care about, our spouses, or it could be a dispute with a business colleague or someone in the professional environment, where we have a complete misunderstanding, and we're arguing about two different things. And when we figure out that, hey, wait a second, we're crossing each other in what we're trying to accomplish, and our perceptions are off here, and we can pull back and we can have a good, honest listening to the other party, that goes a long, long way to, building rapport, maintaining trust. But when it doesn't happen, trust collapses very, very quickly, which was one of the things that was mentioned in the Fraser Institute report. So maybe do we want to cue that up now so the viewers can get a sense? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, let's watch it.
So I'm here with Jess from Durham District School Board Concerned Parents Group. Jess and I have known each other for a few months. We've been working on some various projects together, some around the Million March for Children back in September, Parents' Rights Coalition, a national organization that's coming together, and Jess has been contributing. But you had some news this week, and you had some sort of some big moments in the work that you've been doing in your own the school board and pushing back. First of all, can you tell viewers where is Durham Region?
So Durham Region is just east of Toronto, Ontario. It's quite a large region. It goes all the way from Pickering to Oshawa, and then goes all the way up to the southern side of Lake Simcoe.
Okay.
Or not Lake, yeah. So
you've been engaged with the school board for a while now. When did DDSB Concerned Parents form?
So we didn't form until the beginning of May. It was actually some of the freedom fighters from our area who brought to light some of the situations going on in the school board. And there were a group of parents who believed that we needed to have a group that was specific to this issue. And we were able to bring those efforts together.
So it formed in May of this year.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? And did you guys kind of launch any events? There was big events happening across Canada in June. Did you guys have any sort of observation? Was there an event that you did in June after formation, or did you really pick up steam as the summer rolled along?
So we participated when and encouraged people to participate when there were things like walkout days, and encouraged people to write their boards and trustees on those days and make it clear why they were pulling their children.
Right.
So that way we would have they couldn't deny that there was that voice being put forward.
Right.
And then and then there was the announcement of the march in September and the beginning of the summer. And that really, originally we had planned on going down to Toronto for that. And we ended up with so many people from around the community reaching out to us, asking us to please put something forward for like as an event for that day, because there were a lot of them who felt like we needed to let our board know that we didn't agree with this right now and what was going on. We ended up
Mhm.
with just over 1,000 people show up.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, really, this has caught the public imagination in the last few months. The narrative is collapsing around this, the woke influence on schools. More and more people are realizing what's going on. What areas specifically have you been focused on in your, as the group has come together? What are the, like, maybe it's one, maybe it's a couple, the high level
So
things that are the biggest concerns?
So our biggest things are like transparency and accountability, um, and misconceptions. We're finding that those are the top three things, and they kind of go into quite a few different areas as a result, such as we're finding that like the curriculum, they're showing things outside of the curriculum in the hallways of schools, and that's currently not covered under a lot of the Education Act and the curriculum, like how that's judged. So that was something that we've brought forward as a concern.
So can you
We
give us
brought
something,
Yep.
give us some examples of some of those materials? Um,
So like talking about transitioning, for example, and the concept that you can be a male or a female or and flip flop back and forth as you please. Um, there were like our board has put on Instagram posts of kindergarten children learning this, and then we see it on bulletin boards in the hallways as well. So the one in the classroom is definitely a no-no, and like we've pointed that out to our trustees that some of our superintendents, that on multiple occasions we bring that forward and it's completely ignored.
Ignored is one thing. Have some people have received some really negative responses. Have you kind of got any a real strong pushback, or the name calling, or the shutting down communication? What sort of ignorance are you dealing
So
with here?
So in the Durham board, it's gone as far as we've had trustees stand up and counter protest parents when they don't even know what parents are standing for. They are putting forth bigoted remarks like that parents are all anti-LGBTQ, that parents want nothing to do with this at all whatsoever, and that we're trying to abolish it from the school system. And that's a huge concern, especially when these trustees are supposed to be accountable to parents as well and their concerns.
So it's like they're, you know, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but in relationships, sometimes couples can be arguing about two very different things and missing each other in what they're talking about. Is that kind of
Yep.
your sense of what's happening? Like you're presenting concerns and
So
they're coming back to
I,
you with,
I think part of the problem is outside influences into our board.
okay,
I think that's a huge part of it. We've seen that displayed in the union meeting, uh, and along with our teachers' unions both put out a statement after our board meeting when that was uh, completely defamatory towards parents.
yeah,
Um, and encouraging this type of misconception, which then results in a censorship.
yeah, yeah. Well, we've experienced that too here in the Ottawa region, um, where, well, I mean, it's the same tactics used with the trans activists pretty much everywhere, where you just name call somebody, basically you other them and group them into another category that is contemptible, and you can just ignore, or abuse through defamatory tactics and attacks and personal character assassinations and that sort of thing. But you had a big breakthrough this week. Like I talked to you a couple of days ago when you were kind of bouncing.
Yeah, we um, we reached out to our chair and our vice chair, and I highly encourage parent as each other to start talking to each other and start collaborating and pushing for these meetings. We had a wonderful private meeting with our chair, vice chair, along with 3 of our superintendents, and it allowed us to bring forward a lot of our concerns and our what the believed misconceptions were going on within the board,
Yeah.
and how we believe these were being pushed. And I do truly believe by their remarks at the end of the meeting that they were taking to heart that perhaps they had been looking at this in a wrong light, and perhaps they've been misled by individuals and
Interesting.
corporations and organizations. Now, they
Yeah.
didn't say organizations and all that to the word, but you could tell that there was definitely a feeling of that remorse almost
Okay.
for not fully maybe seeing the whole entire picture.
Yeah. Well,
And I do believe, yeah, it's a
that's
great
really,
step forward.
yeah, that's a big breakthrough, because when you can get, like I mentioned in that sort of couples, I looked at couples therapy from a clinical perspective, but also, uh, in relationships, sometimes you seek a third party to give you a hand on communicating, um, and it sounds like, one of the strategies is, okay, well, I'm going to stop talking, and I really want to listen to what you've got to say, um, and try and understand it as best I can. Set aside
Mhm.
my disagreement, set aside my immediate reaction, set aside my judgment. I just want to stop and pay attention to what your concerns are, and aim to see where you're coming from. It sounds like that's kind of what happened.
It truly was. And it, uh, it's the first time I can honestly say in, well, at least since the group has been formed, because I honestly, I was naive to myself to quite a bit of this previously to this year. And it's, well, at least to the extent that it is.
Yeah.
And it's, it feels like a sense of relief. It feels like they're finally starting to hear us out. They're finally starting to understand what their roles and responsibilities truly are, um, and that perhaps misconceptions need to be put aside.
Yeah. This is terrific news. Um, it's certainly much better than hearing, like, just recently. I want to say it was May or June. We were getting news that certain groups are being banned entirely from school board meetings, and
Yeah, we were banned May was it 15th or 17th, whatever the day of that meeting was. We got kicked out. We were like one of the first boards to get kicked out. And
wow.
it was all through, a lot of it was misconception.
Yeah.
Um, uh, it was through, and like we've, and the worst thing is we presented the board with um, documentation and evidence of what had actually occurred that evening, because after talking through to some of our trustees, the way that our boardroom is set up, when you're sitting in the trustee seats, the way that you can, sorry, I'm just trying to think of the verbiage for it, but the way that you hear the gallery
Yeah.
is different than when you're in the gallery. And so they're not necessarily hearing everything fully. And so there was a lot of misconceptions that happened as a result of that. And it was, in our belief, the fault of the director for not asking the people who were causing a scene before the meeting even started. They should have been removed. Those
Right.
individuals who were causing issues should have been removed at the beginning of the meeting, And I truly believe we wouldn't have ended up to the point like where we had to call the ombudsman to allow us to get back into the meeting. And so we want to we've said to our board, like our chair and our vice chair, that moving forward, we want to have a more positive feed, like back and forth with them, and stop with the negative assumptions, right? And that we need to have, if they expect us to have trust in them, they have to have trust in us.
Right. Wow. That's a big one. Now, Melanie and I are going to chat a little bit about this together, and I'm going to put up one of the slides from the presentation that you shared with the board, and that's the legal framework, sort of the basis for what's getting called parents' rights, but really I think is more about parents who are exerting their authority and their responsibility to protect their kids from things that are making an awful lot of people uncomfortable if you look at what's happening. So we're going to go through some of those legal things and get into some details in our discussion. But as we're wrapping up, if people are watching from Durham Region, how do they get in contact with you? What is your website? What platforms are you using to gather people together?
Actually, right now we're mainly using, and I know it sounds archaic now, but we're mainly using Facebook. So we're, I know, right? And it hasn't even been around that long. But and we use WhatsApp and stuff like that. But we mainly share our stuff on like DDSB Concerned Parents on Facebook, as well as Durham Parents United. And one of the other that's a great website to go to is Protect Literacy. They have such fantastic information that can be applied to most of the boards across Canada, which is and they've done such a great job with it. That's the best way to reach us is through Facebook. Unfortunately, like we're just we are a grassroots movement of parents, truly.
Amazing. And that's happening all over the country. We met because of other parents groups kind of coming together, and we've formed an organization that you're participating in. That's Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada. The website is prcoc.ca. We're inviting parents groups to join in with us, and as we're growing in signatories and member organizations, our efforts are to be able to share stories like yours and some of the strategies that you've adopted that are successful in being able to bridge communications with your school board. Also share some best practices on things like organizing and building, getting people involved and building lists and communicating effectively in your own communities. And really great news from Durham District this week, Jess, and I'm glad you joined us for sharing that. And hopefully people who are watching from your region can get in touch with you and join in the efforts. And so just the last thing, what's next steps for you and with the school board at this point?
So so right now we're waiting for them to get back to us with the information that we've provided them, because we've flooded them with a cornucopia of concerns that we feel they've been ignoring for a while. And it's mainly organizing people to start sending in emails and put their concerns forward in a way that is measurable.
Yep.
So that way down the road, we can prove to our board and we can prove to our Ministry of Education that this is something not to be ignored. This is not bigotry. This is community. We are not trying to get rid of anyone. We are not trying to take away from anyone. We are just trying to allow everyone the space to be themselves and the space to raise their families as they see fit, as they are, allowed in Canada.
Yeah. Amazing. Congrats on your victory this week, Jess, and thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to learning more about what you're doing again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so that was a lovely conversation that you two had. I think one of the things that I found interesting listening to it was the fact that despite despite the fact that they were removed in May from the board in quite a contentious event, that they still managed to get a private meeting with uh, was it the chair and the vice chair, and they
Yeah,
gave a presentation.
and a couple superintendents, I think. Yeah,
Right.
um, and I had a look at the presentation, like the slide deck, really really well done. Um, and they managed to kind of dispel um, this image that the board had put onto them. They managed to break through.
Yeah, she
Um,
used the words misconceptions. A lot of misconceptions was mentioned a few times about the position of parents, which is an important point.
yeah, well, when I mean, this is partly due to COVID, I think, um, but we have, we're so quick to judge other people. It's like a reflex. We just go to the label. I mean, we can look at the division in U.S. politics as an example. Republicans automatically dismiss everything the Democrats say, and
Yeah.
Democrats automatically fight against everything the Republicans say. So, this kind of explains a bit why, you know, Democrats are they're breaking themselves apart. They're destroying themselves by reflexively defending gender ideology just because the Republicans are opposed to it. Right? So
Yeah,
there's no thought going in here.
but there's something to be said. One thing a pattern that I've been noticing is that at least I don't know if this is for better or worse, but in the US, those voices are heard, whether you're pro Republican or pro Democrat, those voices are heard in frankly in equal measure, right? Even though they're divisive, and even though there's a lot of tension between the two, and like you're right, it's almost like it's very tribal. And so if I identify as a Democrat, then I automatically disagree with everything that someone who identifies as a Republican will say. That's true. But they're having those public conversations. They're able
Hmm.
to do it. And it's the same in the UK. I've mentioned this several times in other podcasts, but Helen Joyce currently just recently had a very public recorded session where they were debating against Peter Thatchell, who's been a LGBT activist for a long time, certainly a trans activist, and Fred, what's his name? I can't remember his last name, is also a very famous trans activist in the UK. But they had the debate. They had it.
That's
That
a real
doesn't happen
breakthrough.
here in Canada.
That's a real breakthrough. The fact that they had that in the UK as well. It's an indicator to me that things are moving. And
But that's what I'm saying. We're not doing that here. And so the fact that this meeting happened maybe is an indication that we're moving into a place where we're able to have discussions where we might initially disagree.
yeah, yeah, I hope so, and I hope that, and we're gonna talk about the Amy Hamm thing in a minute. I think there's some good things that we can touch on in there with how the conversation is developing as a consequence of the Amy Hamm hearings,
Yeah.
um, and hopefully this means that there's more open and transparent conversation coming, because the alternative is quite frankly terrifying. Um,
Well, the alternative here that exists in Canada is that there's only one position that is acceptable to be heard in public and the other is not. And we know that the position of the dissenting voice on transness, trans ideology, whatever you want to call it, the
yep.
disagreeing voice is not acceptable. It's not allowed. That is the alternative that we're currently living. So maybe it
Yeah.
is time to move on to Amy Hamm. So um, Amy Hamm is a BC nurse, and some people may be aware of her. I was aware of Amy Hamm, but I can't say that I was deep. I know the ins and outs of her story. I know that she and Billboard Chris put up, I think, is an "I Love J.K. Rowling" poster, and that
Yep.
she had been controversial in BC for a little bit, and then she's currently in a trial. But I'd like to spend a little time, um, if you could, describe who is Amy Hamm and why is this happening right now? What's the background?
Well, I actually learned quite a bit about Amy Hamm this week myself. I've known about her for some time, In 2021, her and Billboard Chris Elston teamed up to um, put up a billboard on Hastings Street in Vancouver. And they borrowed, in my world, sometimes we call it R&D. That's rob and duplicate. They borrowed Posey Parker's protest method from the UK. Posey Parker put up
Mm.
the same billboard in the UK and was attacked for it, and all kinds of controversy about it. In Vancouver, when the billboard went up, it caused immediate controversy. A city councilor called it hate speech. And for those who don't know the nuance or the kind of story, J.K. Rowling, of course, is the author of the Harry Potter books, and one of the wealthiest women in the world, a tremendously generous philanthropist, and a women's rights advocate. A big part of her charitable contribution and give back from the billions that she earned, and she donates an awful lot of money to these causes, was about women safeguarding and helping women with the resources to get themselves out of very intractable abusive relationship problems and violence and that sort of thing, because she herself dealt with that.
Hmm.
And so this issue of male-bodied people, trans-identified people coming into women's spaces, rape crisis shelters, hospitals, all these intimate spaces for women is something that she picked up on. And a few years ago, there was a case in the UK, a woman by the name of Maya Forstater.
Yeah.
And Forstater is a lawyer. She was working for an organization, and she expressed gender critical beliefs. Now, gender critical beliefs are, we believe in biology. I think you and I would both self-identify as gender critical. And we believe that there's that there's no such thing as gender. That there is that people can have gender dysphoria and may choose in some extreme situations or rare situations to live their life expressing themselves as the opposite sex. Um,
Yeah, we
there's
have
no
to say that being gender critical doesn't mean you're transphobic. You
correct.
can have those two thoughts together. You can not believe that gender exists whilst being perfectly okay with people living that whatever lifestyle they want to live. Like it's not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. Well, of course, this is the thought stopping technique of the activists, right? So automatically any criticism gets labeled transphobic.
Yeah.
So, you know, J.K. Rowling made a calculated move a couple of years ago. She put up a tweet: dress however you please, love
Yeah.
whoever you want, and outlined this. It was, um, you know, it exploded on Twitter. She was mobbed and received, tens of thousands of abusive tweets and name callings and rape threats and death threats and all these things. And she really galvanized the gender critical movement around the world, and women especially, um, you know, kind of fell in under that. Um, let's call it narrative that J.K. Rowling, the position that she took, and Amy Hamm um, was one of those people. Amy has been involved in this actually for maybe 6, maybe 7 years. She said in her testimony that she became concerned about this after 2016, which in Canada was, we call the Pronouns Bill. Bill C-16 passed into federal law. BC has seen a lot of this gender ideology infiltrate institutions before other
Yeah,
places
it
in
seems to be
Canada.
that's where it comes from in Canada. Well, that's where it originated in Canada. Really, is BC. They seem to be, yeah, dealing with
Yeah,
it from the base up.
so they're the farthest down the road on gender activism, and some of the most notorious trans activists in Canada are from BC.
Yeah, I
Um,
wanted to say that just underline that it seems to me in BC America has a lot of violent trans activists, and the UK certainly has a lot of violent trans activists. But Canada, although they're angry, not so much. But it seems the concentration of violent trans activists for some reason seems to be in BC.
yeah, uh, yeah. they've been given a lot more leeway a lot sooner. So one of the things that came up in the hearings this week. So let's see. So a little more background on Amy. So she's a registered nurse. She's been practicing for 12 years.
Yeah, that's really
Um,
important. The fact that she is a registered nurse. I just wanted to underline that.
yeah, it's important because that was one of the things. So she's as a registered nurse, that's her profession and how she
Yeah.
spends her days. But her activism is outside the nursing profession. She's not leveraging her title and her credentials as a nurse to criticize gender ideology. It happens to show up in her bylines. She also had started in her career in journalism school. So she's a trained journalist, and she's written for Quillette and um, the Critic, and for a whole
I think
bunch
she
of
wrote for Post Millennial,
post millennial as well.
possibly.
And I wrote up a list when she was giving some of her background, but she regularly writes for the New West Times.
Mm,
I think we talked about the editor of the New West Times a couple of weeks ago. So
yeah.
so they're connected. Amy lives in New West, um, and so she's got this these writing skills as well as her day job, and she used her writing and communication skills to address the issues arising around the loss of women's rights to safe spaces, child safeguarding issues, particularly women who are, you know, like the people who J.K. Rowling stood up for, women who are in abusive relationships, who are trapped in the sex trade, and how these trans activists, incursions into women's spaces, like the Vancouver Rape Relief Center, was one of the kind of focal points a few years ago, where they said we're not going to allow male-bodied or men who identify as women into the rape crisis center because we're working with the most vulnerable women um, who have been sexually assaulted, and we're protecting the space. Well, the city of Vancouver called this transphobic. We had
Mm,
a couple of these trans activists who jumped on board saying how horrible it was and bigoted it was to not allow men into these women's safe spaces. Um, the city of Vancouver cut the funding to the Vancouver Rape Relief Center, and they almost went under. They've now been able to generate enough fundraising to keep the center going. They had to fight a Supreme Court battle to maintain their uh, their ability to just be for female-bodied people.
yeah. All in
And
the
so,
name of allowing men in female spaces.
yeah. So before COVID, Amy and some others were doing public, like town hall and public speaking events to raise awareness about these issues. They were targeted by the trans activists. In some cases, she was getting death threats. There was threats of violence around some of these events. They tried to host an event at the Vancouver Public Library, and the Vancouver Public Library got threats themselves, and then said, "Well, your security bill is going to be $7,000 or $8,000 that you're going to have to pay if you're going to host the event here." Um, so Amy's been involved in this for quite a while, and then when they put up the billboard, uh, they went after her employment. The trans activists, a named individual and an anonymous individual, went to the BC College of Nurses and Midwives and filed a complaint that this nurse was transphobic and bigoted and
Yeah, and
was
this has nothing to do with her job. Her day job is a nurse. That's what she does in her day job, and then in her own private time, as a private citizen, um, was an advocate for women's sex-based rights. These are two
yep,
separate things.
yep. Um, and and they also filed complaints with her employer. So they filed complaints with the college and filed complaints with the employer. Um, the the college, there was a whole long list of charges. In the last couple of months, they dropped a couple of the charges, but we're now
So I'm
into
just going to stop you there for a second. So just to clarify for myself, when you say charges, so this is the confusion for me. Is that like criminal charges? Is that what we're talking about?
they
Can
would
can a
be and maybe charges isn't the right word. I'm sure the lawyers would tell me there are
Well, because the
allegations.
court seem the case seems criminal somehow. Like it seems like a really good
Mhm.
court case, and so, or maybe it is the wrong terminology.
It's definitely
Accusations,
falling
maybe allegations,
allegations and accusations of
right?
transphobia and bigotry. The assertion is that in her role of a nurse, this is preventing her from providing proper care to trans people. That it would make trans people not seek out medical services because she's bigoted like this,
Because
and they're
she's
trying to
causing harm.
because she's
She's
causing
harming
harm,
trans
right?
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and the other, what's the other one? Harm and something else. Um, so there were days in the trial or the hearings last week. I think there was 3 days.
Is
This
it
week
so?
there
Again,
was
I'm just going to stop you there quickly. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but there's currently a case going on, and it's public. But is it? It seems to me like it's a trial, but we're talking about uh, the BC nurses. Is it a college of nurses? Anyway, so
the
it's like a
College of Nurses
over
and Midwives.
right. So it's not legal. It's not criminal, but it seems very much like a trial. So she's kind of on trial right now. Um,
Yeah.
for these accusations. So she's defending these accusations that she's an unsafe nurse and therefore cannot practice nursing. And you've been following that. You've been following it from the very beginning.
Yes, I didn't follow the hearings last fall, so there was a couple of kind of clusters of dates last fall, and then some more dates January, February this year, and
But she's
then
defending her ability to remain to keep her
as
nursing
a
license.
licensed nurse. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's trying to defend her career. So the question here around freedom of expression is just like the Jordan Peterson case, where the Ontario Psychology College of Psychologists, the OCP.
Which is the same
Um,
thing. We have to say this is the same thing. It's just that Jordan Peterson is famous, and
yep.
so it was covered. It was talked about quite a lot around the world. There was a lot of attention on it. But this is the same thing that's happening to Amy Hamm. But she's a citizen. She's not famous. I mean, she has some, I guess, notoriety because of the activities that she partook in BC. But she's not Jordan Peterson famous. And although
She's a
it,
mom. She's a mom of two boys. You know, like I
yeah,
think her boys are like I'm kind of guessing, but they're like let's say 6 and 9 sort of ages, and and she's a hard worker and trying to get through life like the rest of us. You go you do your job and you raise your family and you try and be
yeah,
involved in the community. And she has a long track record of contribution. She's worked in the field of psychiatric nursing and was like an outreach nurse in the Lower East Side of Vancouver. So we're talking about she was talking in the kind of the direct examination by her lawyer about being called away from these single room kind of hotel shelter type spaces for women to deal with overdoses and be able to administer whatever narc
Narcan.
narcon,
Yeah.
right, to save people's lives and then wait for the paramedics to get there. And she's working, in one of the most
Yeah, the East
diff-
Side is the most notorious, probably most notorious place in all of Canada for
in North
homelessness and
America.
drug
In
use, and
North America, yeah, it has been
yeah,
for decades.
on
Um,
par with like San Francisco and things like that.
yeah, so she's working with, and she routinely worked with trans identified people, with sex workers, with women escaping violence in their domestic relationships, drug addiction, like you know it really takes a courageous and compassionate person to take on that kind of role. So, you know, I think it speaks a lot to her character. Um,
Hmm.
Anyhow, so we're like I don't know. I think it's like 15 days or more that we're into this now of these hearings. We had hearings in the last couple of weeks, and the big thing was the evaluation of Dr. James Cantor
Yeah,
as an expert witness. So um, James Cantor worked at CAMH, was the Canadian Association of Mental Health Clinic, the transgender clinic, in Toronto, and CAMH was one of the um, leading places in the world for research and therapy and support for trans identified people for decades.
Did Blanchard also work at CAMH?
Yeah. So what I learned was that James Cantor actually took over the role of like leading that department when um, Zucker retired, which would I think that was 2006. Now, like my brain's kind of on overload because
Yeah, they're
I
not just
lied.
Canadian famous sexologists. These are world famous sexologists that underpin all of the, or a lot of the academic scientific understanding of trans, well, transsexual, but now we sort of moved on to transgender. So that's quite important.
Yeah. So Cantor went through his CV and when he went through his in great detail the kind of
Yeah.
research that he's done over the decades to talk about the different kinds of presentations of gender dysphoria and people who have ideations about being the opposite sex. And he talked about all. I mean, you know, the he has co-authored many research papers and peer review uh, publications, and he served as the editor in chief of an academic journal that was peer reviewing and publishing research in the field of sex and identity, and
Hmm.
you know his specialization is in atypical sexuality, and has done a tremendous amount of work researching pedophilia and working with sex offenders over the decades, partly to help um, avoid either repeat offenses or to be able to try and predict and manage to prevent sexual abuse of particularly women and children. Um, so a
So,
long and very decorated career.
so why is it important that Dr. Cantor participate in this? Why was he brought in? Why is a world famous sexologist brought into this nurse's defense of her license?
Well, to get the facts on record, and I think this is so. There, as you observed, it looks like a criminal trial or a court. You know, it's following court process and court procedure. Um, you know, for those of us, if you've ever been on a board of directors, maybe at your church or maybe at an organization, the board of directors typically follows what's called Rob's Rules of Order, right? It's sort of like you know the custom and procedure for communicating within that environment, and the process they're using is is very much around you know these are legal hearings and legal proceedings, and so instead of a judge, we have the panel that's evaluating, and you know the chair, the lawyers speak kind of through the chair, Madam Chair or Mr. Chair,
But am I
and
not even
they
mistaken that you even have people on this call, which you can see publicly, and we should probably share the link to view it because I think it's very important to view it. But there's also titles like court reporter, you
yep.
know, court reporter. So again, you know, very legalese, legalistic.
Yep. And they're you know they're marking exhibits, they're record keeping. So this is forming part of the public record.
Yeah.
And as I've been live tweeting, one of the things that I've sort of used over and over again is the term "back on the record." And so there's a lot of business that happens in these proceedings. That sort of it's debating procedure, and it's you know the panels recusing them or recessing themselves to discuss an argument made by the lawyers. They come back, and so
Whether it's
like maybe
admissible.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
you're getting 15 or 20 minutes an hour that's on the record, but this is establishing official public court record of these of this topic.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, in Canada, this might be the first where we've had an expert like James Cantor to give the entire like he gave an incredible like course in what is trans,
Yeah.
some of the history of the last 25 or 30 years through his career, how things have changed, the radical change that happened roughly in 2012, 2013, with this big explosion in uh, post-pubertal girls who were suddenly identifying as boys, which we understand under the kind of umbrella term of rapid onset gender dysphoria, or ROGD. Cantor prefers adolescent onset gender dysphoria,
Yeah.
uh, and identifies it as a new type of gender dysphoria that nobody understood prior to 2012, because overwhelmingly the people who were presenting, and so he's put this on the record in court, that there were two main profiles of people who um, identified with the other sex, let's say, because
Hmm.
we didn't have the word transgender. It was referred to as transsexual. There
Yeah.
was childhood onset transsexualism, which was overwhelmingly young boys, very effeminate, and most of them. The process was watchful waiting, and
Yeah.
most of those boys grew up, and studies unanimously recognize, there's 11 of them that I'm aware of, that followed these young boys who were identifying as girls, or saying that they thought they were girls. And when they went through puberty, they came to understand that they were sexually attracted to the same sex. They're gay.
Hmm.
And they didn't, as young children, didn't have the language and the worldly experience, and nor the sexual development to recognize what these feelings were. And so going through puberty alleviated almost all of them from the distress of feeling like they were born in the wrong body. The second type that Cantor talked about was the adult onset. There's typically people showing up in their men, again, overwhelmingly men, typically in their
So usually
30s,
married,
showing up at
usually
the
have
clinic.
children, middle aged.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are heterosexual men attracted to women who had been, you know, dressing up as women for many many years, probably. In some cases, these are the men who, as boys and teenagers, were stealing women's panties and and shoes, and uh, out of the interest of sexual gratification. So Cantor's expertise in this atypical sexuality, um, it, one of the big important things he said was this typology, this type of men, uh, very rare still, who gets off on dressing up as women and presenting themselves as women for their own sexual gratification. It's called
Yeah.
autogynephilia. Gynephilia means attracted to women. Auto means self. The attraction to self as a woman is what autogynephilia is. So he gave the background of that to the court, and also
Yeah.
said numerous times in his evaluation as an expert, and then again as he was being examined direct and cross-examined, that the autogynephile, this atypical sexuality, has um, it often is not the only atypical sexuality or expression of sexuality that these men have.
Yeah.
So he named in the hearings sexual sadism, voyeurism, exhibitionism are some of the common ones that he named. But these tend to be in kind of in clusters, so you don't get trans identification in these men only on its own. It's often clustered with these other things, not just sexual proclivities and interests, but also personality disorders. Um, so there's an overlap that we know about with these AGP, which is the acronym for autogonophile, um, where they, uh, it, we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder. Uh, I mentioned sexual sadism. Anyway, like these are
Yeah.
men that need to be screened, and we used to have some gatekeeping in the clinics that would, you know, you, these men would come in, and then there'd be kind of a process of saying, okay, well, how are you going to make the transition? They get other therapy. Uh,
So I listened to the to James Cantor, but I didn't catch all of it. Did with the new type of transgender, which is not like we still have old transsexual uh, types that arise, sure, but there's this new type, this rapid onset or adolescent onset, whatever you want to call it. Did he?
Yeah.
This is generally girls, but I don't remember. Did he mention it about the boys with this new type of transgender? Did he mention that at all? I don't think he mentioned the separation between boys and girls, just that it was the new type.
Yeah, he correlated these things to the onset of social media. He talked about the social contagion explanation of this. Um, and he talked about typically, well, he was, if I recall, he was asked about the age of patients that he had worked with or supervised people working with who were presenting in their early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And irrespective of their biological sex, he categorized this type with the adolescent onset. So he didn't drill specifically into,
No.
young boys identifying as girls, being either autogonophile or what have you. Um, but he did cluster it into this kind of new phenomena of trans identification.
And one of the other things that he talked about was that okay, so the lawyer, I think is her name Barbara Findlay?
Barbara
I think that's her
Finley.
name. Right. So she's, I guess you could say, the prosecution if we were going to use court language.
Yeah, yeah,
And Barbara Findlay's point, or what she was trying to get out of him, is that WPATH is the standard, which is, I can't remember what it stands for. Maybe you could help me with that.
WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
Well, you talk about it in a second, but so WPATH being I guess the standard. James Cantor's point was that there is no standard in this whatsoever. But Barbara's Finley's point was, well, can you prove that anybody is not using the standard? Can you know? There's a lot of pressing about. Well, if what you're saying is true, then how come everybody is using WPATH? Can you think of anybody that's not using it? And James Cantor did raise the point of the inability in Canada to express any kind of differing opinion from the opinions stated in WPATH for the reasons that Amy Hamm is currently on trial, which is that
Right.
if you, one, there's the legal aspect, which I'm sure you could go into, but the other aspect is the public struggle session, the public shaming, the
Yep.
inability, even if you didn't believe, and even if you didn't think that was the right process, which is unscientific. He spent a lot of time talking about how it was unscientific. That you weren't able to say that you weren't doing it. You had to say that you were doing it. I found that
Yeah.
very interesting.
The, he said over and over again that the way that WPATH has their standards structured, they're explicitly open to interpretation.
Hmm.
So he said when you have kind of a process like that that says you can interpret it however you want, there is no standards. They call those things standards, but if you can do whatever you want, it means those aren't standards.
Do
And
you, I mean, if you don't have this, fine, we can skip over it, but do you have maybe a quick synopsis of what the WPATH standard is? I've never gone through it personally.
there was a lot of energy early this year in a number of groups um, that I'm, kind of have my ear to,
Hmm.
because the WPATH SOC, that's Standards of Care, version 8 was was reiterated. So like V7 was, we're going back to 2012, I think,
Hmm.
and that's the one where the affirmation model really came in, as opposed to the gatekeeping model. And Cantor
And the
talked about
affirmation
that.
model being that if someone says they're trans, then they just are, and it doesn't
Then
matter
they're
how
then
they
they're
are, they just
trans.
are, regardless
Yeah,
of any other things that are going on. If they
yeah,
have a mental health condition, it doesn't matter. They're just trans. That's what the affirmation model is.
yeah. So that was with SOC 7, and now SOC
Yeah.
8. I heard a lot of, well, I caught a lot of the conversation from peripheral viewpoint. Um,
Hmm.
and one of the real experts on this, I think, is Mia Ashton, who we both know, and she's been on the show before. She covered a lot of those standards. Like they have a eunuch gender now, which is basically that a child can identify as a eunuch and be castrated, and that's a gender identity. Like
Is it
it's mind
is it
blowing.
based on so is just quickly, is the W path model based on I think it's the Dutch protocol?
I think that's baked in there. Um, yeah, the Dutch
It's now being
protocol
heavily
is that.
scrutinized.
Mhm, yeah, about time. So Cantor was incredibly credible and objective and fact based, and he's a rigorous scientist. And it's one thing, like I have worked with a bunch of scientists and researchers on the AI project that I've been working on for a couple of years, and they have a whole different way of thinking about the world. And then when you
Well, it
combine,
well, it depends. I just wanted to point out that James Cantor, when you say he's a scientist, he's a numerical, he's an analytical type of scientist. He's
yeah,
empirical, okay, and that means
yep,
that you have a hypothesis, which is a question, and then you test that hypothesis, and you keep testing other hypotheses to see whether or not you come to a report, and you do that with measurable data. Right. So we're not talking
yes,
about social science here. We're talking about empirical science. Now, often in trans, they call it science, but it's not science. Social
oh
sciences
yeah,
is very much based on qualitative data, and qualitative data. So there's a data pyramid, right, in
that's
terms
right,
of quality, and qualitative is right at the bottom of
yep,
reliable types of data. And he pointed that out quite a bit. And I thought that was a really important thing for people to understand, is that just because it's called science does not necessarily mean it's based on verifiable, objective data that you can measure,
you're right,
right?
yeah.
And that's the
Look,
kind of scientist that James Cantor is.
he happens to be kind of unique, and that's what makes him, one of the leading experts in the world. It's because he has the math and statistics background. Um, and I mean, I could talk about this for a long time. I did live tweet every day. They're threaded, so if you follow me on Twitter, you can dig those up, and they've been put on what's called an unroll. So you can, I don't know exactly what that is, but basically you can click on this and it'll expand the whole tweet thread so you can read it all at once instead of digging down into each one. Um, he talked about that data pyramid, and he talked about the quality of evidence that WPATH uses being at the very bottom level,
Yeah.
survey level quality with low to very low reliability.
But
Um,
not only that not only was it qualitative data, but they were using protocols and methods that were not standard even in the social sciences. I didn't know that.
yeah. In the last little bit of his cross examination um, uh, this week, he pointed to a Canadian doctor by the name of Bauer, um, who had cited a bunch of research, and it made me think of Brett Weinstein's idea of idea laundering. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I'm interested.
Okay, so Brett Weinstein is an evolutionary biologist. He has a podcast called The Dark Horse that
Dark horse. Yeah.
he and his wife co-host. Brett was the subject of a violent cancellation attack. I think it was in 2017 at Evergreen State College in Washington State, and it really was like a canary in the coal mine moment for um, you know the problem of wokeism and cancellation. Um, but Brett and some people kind of in his orbit. His wife is Heather Hying, also an evolutionary biologist. You've got Peter Boghossian, who's a philosopher professor he was at Oregon State, and he was fired, or he was run off the campus basically until it wasn't safe for him anymore, and he had to leave his job. James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. So they're all sort of like, they were part of that intellectual dark web movement from
And
a couple
Benjamin
of years ago.
Boyce.
Benjamin Boyce. Boyce got his real start by covering the Evergreen
Famous by
State.
covering it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he built his podcast platform from there and really refined his interviewing skills. So idea laundering is this notion in the social sciences, gender studies is a good example, where you get somebody who, you get a group of people together that's going to found a journal. And then the people who have founded the journal are all going to put up social science papers, which are these low quality, survey based or basically pure speculative philosophy,
Yeah.
untethered from reality, and they publish and they reinforce each other's publications in these journals, and there might be several journals that work this way.
Oh, this is what, this
They
is what James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter
yeah,
Boghossian exposed with their,
with the
uh,
so-called
with writing
hoax.
Mein Kampf into a feminist journal or something like that. Yeah. And
And
also
what
the
was the
dog
other
park
one?
sex,
The
whatever it
dog park
is.
sex thing. The I can't remember what the
Yeah.
penis one. The conceptual
So
penis.
so the idea really is that you kind of have this new journal that has low peer review standards, and then you can just keep putting ideas in there, and they're sort of recycled between all three. So in academia, you actually have something called an impact score. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
So the impact score really is just you make your career by publishing in academia. So you publish or perish, as they say, but you want to
Yep.
publish in the highest, the journal with the highest impact score. And so something like the British Medical Journal will have a very, very high impact score because it's very well renowned. But some of these, I guess, idea laundering publications would have a low impact score. So I don't know, like, why you would want
Well,
to
what they
publish in these low
what
low
they do
quality
is
journals.
they it's
Maybe it's
circular argument.
quantity over quality, so you get
Well,
a
well,
lot
well.
out.
You get one of the board members is going to write a paper and that's going to cite another one of the board members, and then if you've got a
Mhm.
couple collaborating journals in the social sciences, you're going to cite each other, and pretty soon you've built an edifice of
You
citation,
do,
but
but
the
your impact score is
underlying
still low.
reference is garbage.
But your impact score,
I don't
maybe
know
it doesn't
how all
matter
that
to the
I don't know
public
how that
then.
works.
It would just mean that as an
So, well,
academic, you're not very impactful.
right. So let me give you an example of what came out during Cantor's testimony. He was asked to
Yeah.
comment on this Dr. Bauer, who had 16 citations in her piece that she prepared for the college to argue for the college against Amy Hamm, and only 4 of the 16 were actually peer-reviewed publications.
Hmm.
So 12 of the 16 were articles that this Dr. Bauer had published, but
Yeah.
they weren't peer reviewed, and
Yeah.
and
So
then
that's the bottom. That's
when
the bottom of the barrel in terms of
right,
evidence.
and then when they drilled into it, it turned out that a bunch of the papers of the 12 were actually citing the same single qualitative survey that she did. It was just she just used the one qualitative survey to cite multiple times to make it look like
But
there was lots of citation.
But that's the low impact that I'm saying, is maybe the public don't understand how to understand journals. And just because it's peer reviewed, if the impact score is low and you're all kind of citing your buddies, that's telling you something about the quality of the research without even actually going into the research to begin with. And that's
Yeah.
what James Cantor is exposing.
Well, Barbara Finley, followed this line of questioning, and she put to Cantor, well, peer review is the way that we establish scientific validity, correct?
Yes.
Um, and and Cantor said, actually, no. So
It's
we
by
have we
replication.
right we have people who are going to review submission to a peer journal, like we did at my journal. I didn't always review everything. Other people who had particular expertise did. And then when we put something up in a peer reviewed journal, it's not specifically to endorse the conclusions of the paper or the research. It is to put that paper and research forward for discussion among scientists to debate.
Yeah. So let me just point something out, that peer review simply means that, so when you put a paper for peer review, what they're looking for is maybe errors in your calculation, or maybe there's some discrepancies with some of the items that you have in there. And so they're going to make recommendations usually. So for example, if they've noticed an error in your statistical analysis, they're going to point that out. Or maybe you didn't mention some information that they needed to know to make those calculations themselves. And so they're not always experts in that field. That they can be, but they're not always. So peer review literally is just it's an editing review. That's what they're doing. They're reviewing for factual accuracy based on certain methods. That's all they're doing. And so I think the public think that peer review means this is, like you say, endorsed, and it's not necessarily the case. The point of science is that you put it out, and once it's out there, other people will then look at what you have, review it, and then try to replicate your findings. That's what the scientific process is. And you keep repeating that. You keep trying to, what we say, falsify. So you have a hypothesis, you write it up, you show your results. Does it agree or disagree with your hypothesis? And other people are then going to replicate what you've done. And that's how we find fraud in science, is that when you put something out and other people are unable to replicate it, it's been falsified. Okay, well, that's not true. And then you move on to something else. And this is what he's exposing.
Yes.
These were not, they were not, it was junk. It's junk data.
Yeah. The thing that really blew my mind yesterday, so Amy finally got to take the stand, right?
Yes.
So we've had all these, I don't know, more than a dozen days of hearings so far, and some of the experts have been accepted as experts, some have not. We're going to have expert testimony from Dr. Kathleen Stock, who's a professor of philosophy, formerly of, I believe she was at Sussex.
Kathleen Stock is going to be...
Doc Stock, yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
How is this
week.
case not so famous right now? Because
right.
we have
world-famous
people talking about an extremely topical thing. So we are definitely putting the link in here. You need to go watch this. This is top entertainment. But I had no idea. So Kathleen Stock is joining next week.
And Coach Linda Blade, right? So Cantor was he got objections a bunch of times about talking about trans women, male-bodied people identifying as women in women's sports, and he was, criticized that he couldn't comment to this because he wasn't an expert in the area. But we're going to have
Coach Blade,
Olympic athlete and Olympic coach going to be talking about this this week. Right. But in the meantime, Amy's on the stand, and I can't imagine. I've been through court, unfortunately, that lasted a couple of years, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Court is a meat grinder. I was in family court for 2.5 years, and it is just such a hideous and dehumanizing and stressful process. And
because with Amy right now, so I had to be in and out, but what they're doing is they're going through her tweets.
Yeah.
Think about that's ridiculous. They're going through her tweets.
Yeah, kind of one by one, and she got a chance. So she's going to be cross-examined on Monday.
And they're reading her tweets. So the defense, if we're going to use again like court language, the defense is going through all of her tweets, and I guess what they're doing is they're setting the tone or trying to explain it ahead of the defense, ahead of the prosecution, because I imagine the prosecution are then going to use those tweets to accuse her of being an unsafe individual.
Right, like the woke do, and interpret everything in the worst possible light with the least amount of good faith possible, to attack and expose. So Amy was going through some of those tweets. This is what they did to
J.K. Rowling. So this is the same treatment as J.K. Rowling, right? Looking at tweets and saying you're an unsafe individual because of this thing that you said several years ago that says. But
now we have it in court. And what Amy was talking about was this idea of peak trans. And I've heard people talking about using an abbreviated term, peaking, and I never correlated it to the peak trans idea. And peak trans is when a person gets it. They suddenly realize,
when they realize,
like what? These men, these trans women are actually, a large percent of them are actually heterosexual, who are doing this because it's a fetish, and so they're
AGP.
They're dressing up in their heels and ladies' undergarments, and they're masturbating and fantasizing, and they're engaging other people in the public world, in the public sphere, and demanding that their fetish be recognized as the fantasy it is
Well,
for them.
yeah, they're demanding that other people participate in the fantasy, and the law is protecting that right now.
Right. So peak trans is when people get that, they go, whoa, okay,
Yeah,
wait a second.
this is not about
This
being inclusive and
this
kind. This is
that's
not
right.
about your.
This isn't about
This
gays
is
and
not about you.
lesbians. It's
You know,
not
your
about
innate
hatred.
identity. No, it's what it was in the 90s. It's what it was in the 80s and the
Yep.
70s. You know, there is a huge part of that, and that's the big problem with the trans. Uh, I guess the wholesale affirmation is that, yeah, sure, there's people uncomfortable with their sex, but they're not. I'm just going on a rant here. They're not able to access the kind of mental health care that they might need to feel more comfortable and live a more comfortable life. And so you're not addressing that. And for the AGPs, you're opening the door for their sexual fetish to be lived out in the public and forcing other people and women especially. And so with Amy, what really came out is a woman who says no
Uh huh.
has to be torn down.
And
And I think you so I
particularly
think
women.
yeah, you mentioned in I think one of your threads that you've been attacked for all kinds of things. You're one of these people that was targeted for speaking out and being gender critical. But even you said in your thread that you did not receive the level
I
of
don't think
threat.
anywhere near what women I know have received and continue to receive on an ongoing basis. It's like guys won't pick a fight with another guy. Like these are such weak and pathetic people who are taking these activist positions that they go after who they perceive as a weak target
But
for their
maybe
for their
your
own.
existence doesn't threaten theirs, though. The existence of women sort of threatens theirs.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, they're
women saying
they're
no
they're
anyway.
they're jealous. They're jealous, right? Because they'll never actually be women. So as Amy was kind of unpacking what peak trans was, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the panel and I'm going, are we peaking? Like, is Amy and is Karen Bastow and Lisa Bildy, her legal team, are they peaking this panel? Who on the
Yeah,
panel is getting peaked? And I was waiting for some of the questions at the end that the college put forward, and
yeah.
I actually early this week, I said to my wife, like, I can't fathom why this panel is not just, like coming back from a, convening over an objection and say, like, wait a second, this is just so far out there. We're just going to drop it. We're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna drop it and we're gonna let this go. Um, and maybe now they're just so committed to it that they have to see it through.
Yeah, they might have to
Um,
see it through. There's that. And one of the things that Amy pointed out that I caught was that she was talking to a friend who came to her and said, "You've been tweeting these things, and you're saying that trans isn't a thing, and why are you transphobic? Like, what's the big deal here?" And she had a conversation with her friend, and they went through what she was saying. She's not transphobic. She's not against trans people, but she was explaining the intricacies of allowing men and women spaces and what the consequences of that were. And she said that her friend at the end was like, "Oh no, you're not transphobic. I understand where you're coming from." And Amy pointed out that she felt the reason that they had to attack women so viciously is that when their position was explained rationally, that very few people could say that they
mhm.
disagreed with that position. And
Yeah,
so if you know that your position is untenable and that people are not, what other solution do you have? Well, is to shut down
that's right.
all discussion.
Yeah. Well, this is part of it, it's all part of the same methodology under critical theory. So we go back to critical theory, which we know critical race theory. We have this oppression oppressor narrative in all of our
Yeah.
institutions. Systemic racism and all of this stuff came out of Harvard. A couple
Well, it
of
actually came
lawyers.
out from Herbert Marcuse, if you want to take it that far.
Yeah,
Yeah, with the new left
the
movement and.
some of the tactics though. I'm trying to remember the guys' names. There was two lawyers. They were in criminal law at Harvard. They were both black, both privileged
Is
men.
it
I mean,
is it Kendi? No.
No, no, this is in the 70s.
Oh, right.
And they were pointing out, and I think, like, if you look at it legitimately, so the American justice system is uh, not favorable to black men.
No.
Now, there's also the reality that, black men in the United States are 6% of the population, and they commit 50% of the murders.
But look,
There
all of
are,
the woke ideologies are pointing out a problem that is real, whether it's woke feminism or woke
yeah,
critical race theory or critical, so woke, queer ideology. They're all pointing out, or they're all identifying a problem that exists. And that's not the issue that people have, that this problem exists. It's the solutions that are proposed
yeah,
to ameliorate or to eliminate the problem are essentially far worse than the problem itself. And so it's, that's
yeah.
that's kind of what
So, so
kind of the problem.
what these two lawyers did, and what people modeled on their behavior, was they started canceling people.
Yeah.
They started, and they basically purified the civil rights, uh, practitioners of civil rights laws in the United States, with the idea saying you can't talk about black oppression if you're not black.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what the process of the woke, infiltration and takeover is. It is to
And don't forget,
delegitimize
yeah, we don't forget
delegitimize
we often.
criticism,
Oh, sorry. Carry on.
delegitimize criticism, and attack anyone who and undermine what anybody says who is not the racial or gender or sex profile of the oppressed person, and say you don't have a right to talk about this. We do. Shut up and sit down, and it's your turn to listen. And that idea um, is what narcissistic abusers do to their targets. And activists modeled this behavior. I use the expression R&D, rob and duplicate. They robbed and duplicated these tactics across domains, from critical race theory to, radical feminism was using these tactics. And it kind of wove its way through, like, in English departments in the 90s in universities, and then ended up in feminist and women's studies, which became gender studies. And the tactics became part of the study of these ideal laundered uh, domains. And so we have activists who are radically defending fantasies and ideas completely disconnected from reality itself, disconnected from biology, disconnected from science, disconnected from the scientific method. But if you're not a trans woman, you don't get to criticize it. Sit down and shut up. And just like you said, the you can't defend it on the fact basis. So you stop the conversation and you intimidate and threaten anyone who disagrees with you.
And so to bring it back to the case for a minute, this is what's being discussed in the case. I know we've talked about it quite a bit, but it's because it's so important what's going on, the conversations that are going on in this case, and so that's going to carry on next week, and I think for a little while. But what do you think it means if if we think about Maya Forstater, that Maya
Yes.
Forstater in the UK, who I think she was a lawyer, and she um, it was gender critical, lost her job, and then she defended herself, saying that she was allowed to be gender critical and she shouldn't lose her job, and she won. And I spoke to a parent on the Resilience today who is in the UK and is also taking some legal action because of things in school, because he said he was able to do that now because Maya Forstater won her case,
Yeah.
and people started being able to speak truthfully about factual things in a public way in the UK because of that case. And so I think this Amy Hamm case, Amy Hamm is our Maya Forstater,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And
Hundred
and I
percent.
think that's why all of these big names are being brought into this case, because although it's she's defending a right to retain her license to practice nursing, the impacts of this case are massive, I think, for free speech in Canada, right? Are
Yep.
we going to accept, this is my speculation on this, but are we as Canadians going to accept um, compelled speech, compelled thought, right? Or are we
Hmm.
going to take the stance that individuals have the freedom to have their own thoughts, and that's okay, and they can express them in a public way if they wish, and that can be separate from their job, and they, so all of these things are intertwined, and it affects other Canadians because. So I don't know how you feel. I'll ask you this: what do you think is the outcome for Canada if Amy wins, and what do you think the outcome is for Canada if Amy loses?
Well, Amy's already said that if she loses here, she'll take it to the Supreme Court. And, we've had our hopes pinned on the Supreme Court before with an issue like this. The Barry Neufeld case, again in British Columbia, Barry Neufeld was a school trustee in Chilliwack. He criticized the SOGI curriculum as it was being implemented. And because Barry is Christian Orthodox,
Mm.
um, and he's a white male. He was basically targeted and marginalized. Like it's a dirty word to be a practicing Christian in Canada now.
Yeah,
Like,
you cannot be male, you cannot be cis, you cannot be a Christian. These are all bad things to be in Canada, sure.
yeah. So Barry was
Oh,
attacked
and
by
white. He's also
yeah,
white. Also the bad thing.
Barry was attacked by Glenn Hansman, who was the head of the BC Teachers Federation.
Yeah.
And he was called all kinds of things: transphobic, bigot, hateful. He was Hansman insinuated that he was a pedophile
Yeah.
by saying that Barry had no business being anywhere near children, and he was
Oh, wow.
banned from
Yeah.
visiting schools where he was a school trustee. He couldn't go onto school properties because of this defamation. And it
Mm.
was amplified by all the usuals, the CBCs and the CTVs. And Barry took the defamation case, ended up in the Supreme Court. And the
Who,
Supreme
by the
Court decided,
way, the CBC and BBC and our news, I guess, conglomerate are not covering the Amy Hamm case, are they? I haven't seen that. Have you?
we got we got an article today from a CBC reporter in BC, um, and it was couched.
Yeah.
Okay, like I was a target of a guy named Jonathan Monpetit, who's
Mm.
a CBC so-called senior investigative reporter, and they took the narrative from the trans activists that I was transphobic and hateful and causing harm
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I had when a media organization does this to an individual, you have a limited amount of time that you can file some legal uh, motions
You mean
for
like
defamation and
defamation?
get them
Yeah.
get them to retract. I didn't do it at the time, partly because I've been through court, and it's not a fun process, and it wasn't a fight that I wanted to engage in.
Mm-hmm.
But this reporter at BC, I can't remember her name, an article got put up today and was actually, there's some objectionable stuff in there from the standpoint of gender critical people from Amy Hamm, but it was not the kind of character assassination that we've seen in the past. There
Awesome.
was there was some not quite equivocation, and I wouldn't call it balanced, but
Mm.
there was some hedging
There's a
there
shift. Kind
because
of like
I
with the
think
Million Mart, where
yeah
some it was not great. I mean, it's not objective, but it's certainly better than previous kind of reporting. Is that what you mean?
yeah yeah
Yeah.
so there was some criticism I saw on Twitter today about the article. That's fine. What's going to come out, I think. So if Amy loses, she'll appeal to the Supreme Court, and then they will have all the expert testimony available to the Supreme Court, which they didn't have in the Neufeld case. So the Supreme Court decided against Barry Neufeld in favor of the oppressed minority, and that the
Yeah.
speech of Glenn Hansman was in the interest of protecting the oppressed minority. And even though he was using ad hominems and really disgusting. Um, you know, insinuating someone's a pedophile is just about the lowest thing that you can say. Um, so there'll be more there'll be more substance if this goes to the Supreme Court. Now,
Yeah.
if Amy wins, I think it begins to open the floodgates because we have all of this on record. We have the
Yeah.
expert testimony. We have a court case and a precedent that is set so that
I
when
wonder, but does that set
cancellation attempts
precedent if
happen,
but does it set precedence legally speaking if it's not, because I mean, it's a court case, but it's
I
not a
think it
court case,
does.
right? Yeah.
Yet it's following court procedure. It's being argued by lawyers. They're establishing
Yeah.
the fact patterns. They've got
Yeah.
the top experts in the world talking about this, um, and uh, it's a legal process and proceeding.
Yeah.
So I hope that that this panel gets piqued and that they find for Amy Hamm and that they dismiss this uh, these charges, and that gives professionals in Canada the ability to say, I disagree.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say these things in the public sphere about things that I disagree about, that it's not transphobic. This is
That
my opinion.
disagreement
We have to have this
is
debate.
not violence. Yeah.
Yeah. And, one of the things that came up over and over again early in the week with James Cantor, both in his, examination to be an expert witness and then in his direct examination, was that the U.S. and Canada have deviated from what the rest of the world is doing.
Yeah.
Europe
I
is
mean, in a
working
very
on these
obvious way. Very, very
at the
obvious
at the
way
top
now.
at the top of the evidence pyramid, right? The systematic
Mhm.
evidence review, the
Yeah.
unbiased preparation of policies around these things. Cantor pointed out to conflict of interest at WPATH, where the people who created the so-called standards of WPATH, which really aren't standards at all, are either working in the field, so they're professionals whose income depends on the policies that are in place,
Yeah.
or they are receiving grants for research in that field, and those grants depend on the narrative around these things. Unlike the systematic evidence review, where you get people who don't have conflict of interest. So he really illuminated just how corrupt WPATH is, and he didn't get too much into the medical, um, the negative medical outcomes, especially for
No.
children. But Amy Hamm is getting into that with some of her testimony, and this is not just a legal process, but we're talking about a professional college of medical practitioners.
Well, this is foundational for Canada, I believe. I believe this is a absolutely
Yeah,
important case, and I'm
yeah,
baffled that it's not more widely shared and written about and talked about. Maybe it's the conflict, I don't know, but to me this is very, very important in terms of the outcome of this
yeah,
has impacts for all Canadians.
yeah. All Canadians,
So,
not just on the subject of gender.
no, on the subject of personal ability to speak what whether or not we should have our speech compelled, whether or not that we can live in a society where evidentiary facts. We're not talking about facts. I'm talking about verifiable, objectifiable data can be discussed if it goes against somebody's ideology, right? So are
Yeah,
we going towards it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, are we a society that's based in personal freedom? Are we a society that's based in ideology? This is what this case is.
yeah, yeah. It's a test of democracy.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm gonna couch this conversation here. We've had a really great conversation about Amy Hamm. I wanted to go into some detail in it because I think it was important for some people to maybe I don't know, for me as well, to delve deeper into this case and what it means for Canada. And that's going to go on. So maybe we'll have more to talk about next week, certainly with some all-stars joining the case. But there's been a couple of other things going on this week. I didn't really follow them, but I think that you might be able to talk about them a little bit. Why don't we start with the Fraser Institute? You said there was a report released. I don't know when. on. Well, I'm not
It
quite
looks like
sure.
it looks like it just came out today. And
Right.
maybe I would point viewers to this. The Fraser Institute is a right of center think tank. They've been around for decades, and uh, the author is. Let me just pull up. His name is where'd it go? Michael Zwagstra. I'm pretty sure I've met Michael in some of these overlapping circles. Um, and it looks like the this article was also published in the Epoch Times, but he's talking about public schools should remain neutral on gender identity and other controversial issues, which is what
Yeah.
parents have been saying for a long time. And and uh, it means that the public conversation around this is shifting. Like this was published November 3rd. So yesterday it got put up. When public school teachers welcome students into their classroom, they accept the responsibility of working together with their parents, including parents whose beliefs differ from their own. It's not the role of teachers to ensure that students adopt correct beliefs,
Yeah.
whether on religion, politics, environmentalism, or gender identity. And this speaks to what we've seen with activist teachers. Our friend Chanel Fall does a terrific job of putting up some of these like grossly ideological um, materials. Some of them
Like
are
the
in
wheel of
school,
oppression.
right? Some of them are in school hallways, of elementary schools. Some of them are at teachers' trainings and professional development trainings. Some of them are in the classroom that kids are taking pictures of and leaking. Um, that are that are very much about the belief of the teachers or the belief of the unions and the outside institutions that are coming in to train the teachers.
Well, let's just say, in a nutshell, it's about teaching ideology like if it was just fact. And the reason I'm pointing this out
Yeah.
is because just today, I think I've mentioned the person I spoke to today. It'll be my next resilience episode. I spoke to a father in the UK who is getting involved in a class action suit in the UK with over 100 other parents um, because it is illegal in the UK to teach ideology like it's fact. It's illegal. They're
Hmm.
not allowed. And
Yeah.
so they're taking the Ministry of Education to court in a class action suit to sue the Ministry of Education for illegal action to hold them to account. And that's what I'm hearing is that the Fraser Institute is saying that as well. And I don't know what the legal situation is in Canada for that, but they're saying in the UK that you can't do that. You can't do that. There are negative consequences. These are the consequences. These are families that have been affected by
Right.
it,
Yeah.
right?
This is the subject that actually got Chanel canceled the first time
Yeah.
because she posted a video on a private teachers Facebook group of Kemi Badenoch from the UK talking about exactly this, that you can't
Yeah.
teach ideology in the classroom.
It's illegal in the
And
UK.
and the
Can't do
context
it.
for Chanel was around Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
But this is very true, and we don't have that boundary in Canada. The unions are activist unions. They self-identify as social justice organizations at
Mm.
all levels. So in Ontario, there are several different unions for teachers. There's secondary school, there's elementary school. It's different in different provinces across the country. But the teachers' unions are explicitly social justice organizations, which means that they're training teachers to be social justice
Yeah.
activists. And those teachers are in the classroom training children to be activists.
And social
And the
justice, all of the social justice is ideology. It's all
100%.
ideologically based. It is not fact based. These are political. It's a political stance, right?
Yeah.
It's so because it's political, it is ideological. Just like if I were to say that I'm a classical liberal, that would mean that I hold that political ideology. And if I was just to go in school and teach it as just fact, it'd be the same thing, right? That's kind of what we're saying here.
I think, I think, I don't know. I'm going to go see Bruce Party. Bruce
Yeah,
Party's a lawyer from Queens. He's going to be in Ottawa on Thursday, and
yeah.
he's giving a lecture, and I'm going to go see him. And he's very much a classical liberal,
Mm.
um, onto the libertarian side. And um, I don't know. I haven't done the real big depth dive on classical liberalism.
Neither have
To,
I. I'm just making a
to,
point.
to me, it says that, okay, like the way that we get to facts and truth is that we engage in debate, that, that, that less government is better than more government because government messes things up. Uh, that individuals have responsibility in the society that we live in, and we get to all have the beliefs that we have, and have a right to be left alone.
Well, okay, so there's objective truth that you can get to through scientific inquiry. Now, science cannot answer everything. There are, like, what is love cannot answer that. You know, there's certain
Yeah.
things that science, empirical science cannot answer, but it does a lot. And so there's that. That is an objective truth that we can find. But when it comes to politics, this is you're right, you have to be able to discuss it, right? You need to be able to have discourse, because all a society is a contract between individuals. They agree
Mhm.
to behave or do things in a certain way, and without discussion. What the problem right now is that a certain group of people have decided that this is how it's going to be, whether you like it or not, and we're going to make sure we can do everything we can to impose it and to
Yeah.
silence all dissent. And that's the problem. It's that the contract between people has been broken, and it's been broken by
Yeah.
a group of individuals that have decided that this is how everything should be. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this, although I'm sure we could talk about it for quite a long time. But there was other breaking news that you pointed out actually right before we started talking about the United Conservative Party of Alberta defending parents. Alberta seems to be stepping up again. So what's
So
going on there?
I'll read a couple different tweets. This is they're having their annual AGM. This is the Conservative Party of Alberta. Premier Danielle Smith was giving her speech at the annual general meeting of the Conservative Party in Alberta, and I'm sure we'll get the direct quote. But we have a tweet from Rachel Emanuel. New Alberta Premier Danielle Smith received a standing ovation at the UCP AGM after she says parents are the primary caregivers and will be respected as such. So we were waiting for Danielle Smith to say something about this. My money actually was on Alberta before New Brunswick, before
Yeah,
Saskatchewan,
yeah,
before Ontario, before BC,
yeah.
and Manitoba. So now Alberta and Danielle Smith joined the conversation about parents' rights and about education and about this politicization of the classroom, whether it's gender ideology or race politics or DEI. Anytime you hear DEI, if you're watching and you're not aware of this, DEI is critical theory. It's critical race theory. It's gender theory. It's everything. It's a nice sounding phrase,
It's the
diversity,
ideology that I was just talking
equity, and
about.
inclusion, that
Yeah.
sounds lovely, but it really masks a
It's about the
very,
imposition. It is imposing itself without any kind of public discourse. It's
yeah,
breaking the contract that you need to run a society effectively.
yeah, yeah. So really great news out of Alberta.
Yeah.
We're looking for more of these things. We're now into a cascade. We can cross our fingers that when this panel finally deliberates and comes back with a decision on Amy Hamm, that they say no fault was found with Amy, that we're exonerating her, and we're encouraging public discussion in the interest of people's health, safety, and well-being in Canada. And maybe that's going to open some floodgates, because I know some medical professionals that are terrified about speaking out for
Yeah.
exactly the reason that Amy is in front of a panel, that they are going to be witch hunted in their within their workplaces by colleagues or third parties from outside, whether patients or anonymous people from not even in Canada can file a complaint and destroy a person's career for wrongthink. So
And that's why it's so important that people like James Cantor are saying what they're saying on the record, for sure.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tune in to, if you can, the hearings are going 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. BC time. That's noon to 7 p.m. Ontario time. I gave a couple of days this week to live tweeting. I don't know if I'm going to have the time and energy to do that this week. If you have an opportunity, check out the hearings yourself. Amy Hamm is going to be on the stand first thing on
It's going to
Monday
be
morning.
killer. It's going to be great.
Lisa Bildy is doing the direct examination. And they shifted from Karen Basto. Karen, if I was ever in trouble and I needed a lawyer, I would want Karen Basto on my side. She
Yeah.
is awesome. And Bildy is much more
She's
gentle.
not nice and
Um,
gentle.
Yeah, at least
Well,
that's how they're presenting in this
it's the
hearing.
good
So
cop, bad cop, isn't it?
yeah, we'll have a chance to hear from Ham, and then she'll be cross-examination. I'm cross-examined. I'm sure she's both relieved this weekend that she's taken the stand and she's got a bunch of this out of the way, but then there's the anticipation of the cross at the by Barbara Findlay, who is a real individual. And then we'll hear from the two other experts this week, Dr. Kathleen Stock from Sussex University, or formerly of, who is an author and a professor of philosophy, as well as Coach Blade talking about trans and sports. And then we'll have closing arguments. So maybe we'll get through it this week. The panel was talking that this was an objective, but there's only 3-4 days of scheduled hearings coming up. So
I just
it's a big
want
one.
to. Yeah, it is a big one. It's going to be a great week. We're going to have hopefully a lot. Well, I think we're obviously going to have a lot to talk about in terms of the Amy
Always.
case next week. I just wanted to finish up a very long special episode on Amy Hamm today, just to wind up and bring us back to Jess from DDSB, because one thing I didn't mention earlier, just to bring us again back to the September 20th protest, or around then, the Million March, there was also the Billboard Chris protest in Toronto. And with that, there was actually some violence there. There was a few arrests, there was some assaults, and there was a
Yep.
man who was arrested called Galen Cramsey. Galen Cramsey
Mm-hmm.
is a 35-year-old man from Oshawa who is one of the seasoned activists that we heard about in the Union Leak video. He was an attendee. He's on the attendee list in the video. He was arrested, and he's actually got a court date on November 10th at 10 Armory Road, Toronto, Court 205. I don't know what time, but Jess found this out, and she just wanted to point out that if anybody had any complaints about Galen and his behavior, I think he was arrested for assaulting Josh
Josh's brother.
Alexander's brother, right?
Yeah.
So this is a minor, and so there's a few other people also there, but that would be something that you're welcome to do. But also, I wanted to point out that Jess has a little campaign that I don't think she mentioned in the video where you had a chat, but I like this little campaign that she's done. She's made a QR code and she's been plastering them all over Durham district, just all over Durham, basically. And a lot of union members, when they heard the leak and they realized that their unions were anti-parent, basically a lot of these people are parents
Yeah.
too, right? And so they were completely anti-parent. They were willing to send violent activists to shut them down. A lot of people who are members of unions were shocked with this call, with this Zoom call. They didn't realize their unions were participating in this kind of targeted attack. And so what Jess did is that she prepared a little QR code and some messaging around it saying, you don't need to pay union dues. If you're against what your union is doing, you can take your union fees and send them to this donation place where you can feed Canadian families, because we're currently going through difficult times. People are having difficult times feeding themselves. We have a crisis in Canada that that we don't talk about very often, but is a problem. People are struggling. Certainly, people in the Durham district are struggling quite a lot, in the GTA too. So, I'm going to post this up. So if you're a union member and you're disgusted at what your union is doing and you don't support it, you don't have to be. You don't have to pay union dues. You can use those dues to help feed people in need, basically. And
Yeah, donate to your local food bank. I think what Jess has done, and she's suggested a couple of places to donate to.
Yeah.
That would be a really interesting movement across the country, is to redirect those union dues, because these organizations have, let's face it, they're ideologically captured and corrupt at the leadership level. And, there's been lots of calls for, decertifying QP in the last couple of months because of this and some other things. And at the same time, instead of funding activist unions, think about funding support for your local community, people who are struggling.
Right. I think it's great. So, Shannon, any last words before we go today?
Amy, good luck this week. We're all cheering for you, and and I hope more Canadians are paying attention. And this is a big one,
Yeah.
and it could really change the direction of the gender critical movement in Canada. And thank you, Amy, for this big sacrifice that you've made. Uh, what I didn't say, Amy had an opportunity to settle this and make it go away. They offered her a 2 week suspension, and some other thing where she had to write a state. Oh, she had to take social media training, and she said no.
Oh,
So good for her, because other people capitulate, right? They don't want, they can't afford it. It's and they just cave in, and this is chilling speech. So congratulations and thank you, Amy, and you've done the right thing, and a true Canadian heroine.
stellar Canadian. Absolutely stellar Canadian. I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need to support her. I stand with Amy
that's why I'm
Hamm.
wearing my
Sure.
pop. Part of the reason I'm wearing a poppy this year, I really made a point to get my poppy and wear it because, people, we're struggling around issues of freedom, freedom of expression, the kinds of things that we fought for, that our grandparents fought for in the World War II, particularly in World War One, freedom from oppression and tyranny, and so I'm thankful. Um,
That was lovely. All right. I'll see you next week.